So John,
It
take
works.
over, introduce your panel, and we're ready to rock and roll.
All right, excellent. So I stand between you all and break. So we're very aware of that. Who was with our panel yesterday? One or two people. Okay, great. So I will then introduce, thank you, Mike. Name is John Ellis. I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves. But before I do, I want to set a few ground rules, explain a little bit about where we're coming from, and then invite you to engage with us. So first up, all three gentlemen have agreed to the following sets of rules. There are no preset questions. I'm going to launch this up. We're going to get going, but it's going to be a free-form conversation so that we have fun and you get the most out of this. There will be debate, discussion, potentially arguments. There will be no foul language, at least not from them, maybe from me. Number two is, in order for that to happen, I agreed to protect guardrails. So I know what is considered off topic. And if you hear me coming in and saying, let's move to the center a little bit, it's because I know what the guardrails are for each of the parties so that they don't run afoul of them. We've agreed that we're not going to do Q&A. What we're going to do instead is we've got the panel for 45 minutes, so for about 30 to 35, we'll see how robust we're going. At that mark, I'm going to stop, and we're going to open it up to you. But it's not Q&A. Well, the question I'm going to ask you now, that you get the entire panel time to be thinking about, is what macro experience would you like to see enabled by the movement of a vehicle from point A to point B? Now, that's a summary. You'll hear more about what we're going to talk about. We're going to be guiding towards a framework of that. What we're going to offer you is 1 minute, an opinion, a comment, and we're going to, hands will go up and we'll move people around. The last time we did this in the panel, we got about 25 people to be able to do something in little less than 15 minutes, 12 minutes, thereabouts. So, no more than a minute. You get to offer opinion. And at the very close end, these gentlemen will be around, will be available for Q&A, and we'll do the Q&A one-on-one off room. Everyone good with those rules and engagement? Great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let each one introduce themselves, no more than a minute, then they'll come back to me, and then we're going to launch into the panel discussion. Andrew, go.
My name is Andrew Lakin. I'm with Faurecia, also Faurecia Aptoide Automotive. So later on I can tell you why those names are all mixed in there. I don't understand it, but it's still there. So Faurecia is actually our overarching name. A little bit about me was with this panel, as I was telling John, is my background actually from Clarion. You guys probably remember Clarion back in the day, right? So coming from Clarion, working through in the industry for over 10 years now, but went from aftermarket all the way through into the OEM supplier base. In that time in Clarion, because right now I'm in infotainment, but then there was really no product lines within Clarion. We had products. So as part of my background early when I came into OEM, it was everything. It was ADAS, it was infotainment, it was whatever we had is from my business development standpoint is what I worked on. So as we became from Clarion to Faurecia, as Clarion was acquired there, we had product lines. So naturally I transitioned over and became into the infotainment side, now called the cockpit experiences side. So that entails IVI head units, our white label apps market solution that we have too, and other electronic components of that as well. The benefit I also have of being in cockpit experiences too is that I also work with my colleague who does the display portions. We have a very good display group, so I work with them. On top of that, working across the design groups with our Faurecia interiors, and then also within our seating group too, I get to kind of see all of these sort of cockpit designs as they happen. So that's one benefit of being involved and me reaching out within the company and actually seeing what we're working on from a huge holistic perspective instead of just the techno bricks. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Yes, excellent. Niclas.
Yeah, so my name is Niclas Gyllenram, and my background is in automotive. I've been engaging with Covisa ever since the beginning of Covisa, and before that it was Genevi. I've done pretty much all parts of infotainment. I've, as a supplier, built head units, navigation systems, telematics units. I've built cloud solutions, and I've been on the OEM side of things. I used to work for Volvo Cars, where I was actually head of infotainment development, and started Volvo's collaboration with Google, building what became the world's first Android automotive-based systems. Currently, I'm running a startup called AIDEN Auto, where we're fundamentally addressing at least the major flaws that I perceive, what I feel is missing still. That's kind of what I learned while at Volvo, that even though we've got Android and pretty much most OEMs are now building Android-based systems, but there's actually something still missing. And I think AIDEN is bringing one piece of that. So overall, I've been working for 20 years in an industry where I feel that we've failed the whole time, and I still feel that in-vehicle experience is not where it should be in the year 2023, and I will try to be a little bit provocative. So I hope that someone will at least ask questions, or even better, disagree with me and argue a bit with me. I like to argue. Yeah.
You like to provoke, not argue.
No, I like to argue.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, that's fantastic. Maybe we should get a seat between us. I was at General Motors. I was there for nearly 20 years. I was responsible for curating the entire global in-vehicle infotainment portfolio from 2013 out through products that'll be launching 2027, 2028. I left about 2 years ago to join the consulting world and advise, sort of businesses who are laggards to the automotive industry in terms of how to build more modern customer experiences. Because the one thing that I will say is, we don't get there fast in automotive. We get there eventually, but by the time eventually hits, sometimes it's too late. So think about like the types of things that we've been talking about here over the last few days about software-enabled technologies and empowering the future. One of my other passions is education. So I'm an instructor also at the University of Michigan, where I teach connected customer experience design for the automotive industry. So essentially, if you think back to where we were in our careers and we're looking for talented minds to help shape what a modern experience wants to be for a connected customer experience, that talent pool didn't necessarily exist. We had to evolve from that, from other roles and other areas throughout our careers, and beg, borrow, and steal people who had sort of transient skill sets that could transfer into the digital experience life. So that's a little bit about me, a little about what I do. I'm at RightPoint now. RightPoint is a consultancy, and essentially we help bring digital products to life across your product experience, your employee experience, and your connected consumer experience.
The only thing you missed was your name.
Bill Thompson.
There we go. Yeah. You were like, wait a minute, did I miss it? No, you did miss it. You didn't. Yeah. Okay. So, Andrew, Niclas, and Bill. As you just, like, they can all speak. You don't need to hear me speak. So I'm going to set up the context, and then I'm going to let the three of you just start riffing. And I know for a fact that the conversations will ebb and flow. As need be, I'll be like, hey, back to the center. I have two sets of twins, but I have two twin girls who are 18 and a half years old. And when they were 8 years old, they were in the back of the car I was driving, and it wasn't a Ford. Doesn't matter the brand name. Katy Perry, the remnants of Katy Perry's "Hear Me Roar" came on, and my one daughter says, "Hey, Dad, hit the replay when I hear that song again." And I said, "You can't do that." My other daughter is like, "No, absolutely, Dad, just go back." I'm like, "You guys can't do this. This is radio." And the one's like, "Dad, seriously?" And they went through all the steps necessary on a mobile device to be able to restart the song. But I was like, "No, you can't do that. This is radio." And in radio, you have to listen to what they tell you to listen when they tell you to listen. It was quiet. The firstborn says, "Well, that's stupid." Quiet. The second one says, "Daddy can fix it because he's in the software." Because the vehicle I was driving, not the one at that time, but my Ford vehicle, we actually did have some software in the unit that was allowing us to do some stuff. Fast forward. They still remember that conversation. Fast forward. They're 18 and a half years now. They can't tell me what kind of car they have. They know that's a Mazda, but they can't tell me. What they do know is that it's got a white cable, always permanently located in it, and when they plug it in, they can actually hit the back button now to go play music. So there's the context for the industry trying to eventually get there. The question is, if the industry finally gets there eventually, but the rest of the world now on a macro experience is literally understanding that the digital ecosystem, the digital life, the entirety of your macro experience is somewhere else. What are the challenges that the OEMs have to face? What are the challenges that Faurecia has to face? And what are the business model issues that society's going to have to resolve if we're really going to have macro experiences centered around movement from point A to point B? And I'm going to just open it up and let you guys go. Ready, start.
I'll just dive into it then.
Go ahead.
There's 1,000 problems we need to solve. but we don't need to solve all of them at once, and we can just start working and getting a better experience in the vehicle by doing whatever is the. I mean, it's not that hard actually to change, and there, like I started with provoking a bit. I think current experience is bad. I think it's been bad for 20 years, but it's getting better, but it's still not where it should be. I mentioned Android because that's actually, it matters. When you get Android into your car, it actually means you have options to get potentially better navigation systems. They're better than the ones I worked on building 15 years ago. Voice control systems, Google Assistant is way better than anything that any of the tier 1 suppliers ever built. Spotify tends to be better at building Spotify than anyone else building a Spotify app, but it's still the same features. Fundamentally, I'm upset actually when I have a 1-year-old German car, and when I run low on gas, the only thing that happens is that a warning lamp is lit. When I need to service the car, there's the same thing. Warning, you need to service your car. To me, that's ridiculous. In this day and age, the car should instead just tell me, here's a list of gas stations you can go to, or here's a list of places you can service your car. That's what's missing, and there's no way any one OEM can themselves build all those services. I'm just ranting on here, but to me, smartphones, sometimes you hear about smartphones on wheels. Cars are definitely not smartphones on wheels, but there's a lot of analogies to the situation that phone industry were in 15 years ago. Nokia, Ericsson, Motorola, they all talked about feature phones. That's still how we sell cars. It's feature cars. And what changed feature phones to smartphones was really the ability, it was not technology, it was not better cameras or better processors. It was the fact that they had an app store in the case of phones, actually. With vehicles, we have all the technology there right now. What's missing is actually the ability to get services at scale, to get apps and the whole world, your car wash to connect with your car, your dealership to connect with your car. We're not even close, and Tesla is not even close. If you run a Tesla, you will have the same crappy experience as I have when I drive to San Francisco, and sure, it can navigate me there, and then when I get to my destination, it'll say, done, and I'm in the middle of the street. No, I'm not done. I need to park. Every trip ends with me having that pain point. Yeah, I should let someone else talk.
I'm watching timing. Go ahead.
In terms of what to do, well, you need to have a way to get services at scale in your vehicle. And the way to do that needs to be about openness. It needs to be about following standards. And ultimately, I actually think this is what Covisa is all about. Covisa is trying to fundamentally solve the problem of connecting vehicles.
William.
So I would completely agree with that, especially with standardization. That's a huge bit, right? So think about Covisa, think about Eclipse, think about standards and practices that are emerging that didn't exist 5-10 years ago. And then think about what you can build on top of that, and think about how you can bridge that gap through APIs, right? So now there was an announcement that General Motors made. I saw the article today, actually. My good friend Tom Weichel here sent that to me, announcing how they are opening up APIs for the development community. So now think about the types of things that enables. If you want to have a karaoke experience, to go back to your example, John, where your daughters can use voice and integrate through that, through a downloaded piece of content through the app by a cloud, that's enabled now. If you want to enable, look at applications like OnX, for anybody who's familiar with OnX, the off-road application. It's a tremendous way for third parties to gain real estate on that dash and provide a tremendous experience in partnership with OEMs where appropriate.
Yeah, where I'd like to go with this is talk about, like you talked about with your story, was the demographic that's not represented in here, I don't think, right? You know, that we talk about, I think, constantly within experiences of what we like, right? And then we break it down into demographics, okay? My parents, the boomer generation, I tell them about technology that's in cars that I'm working on or other people are working on. I don't need that. I just need my car, right? Okay, and then we've got, you know, kind of that middle group, the millennials on up, you know, Gen Xers. Like, we're okay. We can figure some of that stuff out as long as it's done well, right, in the vehicle. And sometimes we still give up on that because, like, hey, it doesn't work. The thing I constantly bring up is the next generation of experiences, right? What are the experiences they're going to want? You know, we know that, younger kids are not getting their driver's licenses. Do we know why? Well, maybe it's because they don't need to go to the mall anymore to meet with their friends. They don't need to stay at home and call and say, oh, we're going to meet up somewhere and they'll come pick me up. Might be just staying home. We don't know, right? It's kind of weird the way that kids are just not driving. Mobility as a service, right? They're using Ubers more. Do they care about their experience of a car that picks them up? It's just a car that picks them up, takes them from A to B, and that's done, right? And so that's one thing I wonder about moving forward is if we're focusing on, or if we sort of figure out is what's going to excite next generation for experiences in vehicles, and are they going to care about the stuff that we sometimes are focusing in the industry on right now, like we have to do this, right? Because you're going to get to the point, like where you're saying, is that it needs to be maybe more seamlessly integrated, because if you have kids today who are dealing with these mobile device experiences that are already fully fleshed out, built, easy to use, they're not hacked together, they're not, kind of square peg, wrong hole, and a round hole in the dash, right? It just works. So as we develop these new experiences, that's the one thing I'm really concerned about is once kids hit that group of where then they hit college, and then, okay, maybe like the millennials, they said where, oh, well, no, millennials aren't buying cars. Well, then millennials all of a sudden started having kids. Oh, crap, now like SUVs are being sold because of it, right? So do kids get to that point where, oh, I don't need a car now, I don't really need it, but then once they get a life or a career, okay, now I do need a car, or do they just go ahead and just continue to use mobility as a service?
Well, so then let me guide this conversation back to, not that any of you've run afoul of guardrails, but go back to maybe a conversation and comment that Bill made, which is if we get there eventually, right? So the industry will get there eventually. But let's flip it around. Like for us, and people do still talk about it, right? The car was it was the social device. It was what brought people together. It's what people rallied around. They wanted to talk about it. They wanted to mod, whether, the Ford community was Ford, the GM community was GM. Sure, there were car enthusiasts, but they were modding. Yesterday, or earlier today, we heard from Roger, right? 10% of the revenue is aftermarket, but 80% of the profit is in aftermarket. And aftermarket is not just defined as dealership stuff, but it's also SEMA stuff. So the question really is, if we don't have fanboy and fangirl communities today, or if the fan community is predicated around the social experience, which might be Spotify or Facebook or whatever, is the OEM going to show up eventually and no one's going to care? And now we've got investments that can't get realized, we've got financial pressures, and we circle the drain again, trying to find the next three-letter word to try and figure out how do we get to be that next big company. I mean, just as a thought-provoking, because I think there are people do know why some kids aren't driving today. They're on Fortnite. They're on other. They're still meeting. Mm-hmm. They're just not meeting using the vehicle as that mechanism. Thoughts?
So the trick there is, which is kind of what I think about day-to-day consulting, is what types of experiences need to be curated and enable in that vehicle to empower people to still have those connected social experiences. And if we think about vehicle segmentation and purpose-built vehicles, things that are built for off-road, things that are built for towing, things that are built for bringing people to and from events, like that whole economy and the what I call purpose-built applications and enablers are the things that the OEMs are going to need to get intelligent about enabling and connecting. That sense of community that you mentioned, John. I mean, if you would have said 10 years ago to an automotive executive, you're going to have influencers in your industry who are building audiences and communities around your products, and they're not employed by you. You would have said, yeah, okay, like whatever. But look what that looks like today, right? You got like Marquez Brownlee, who does all these, crazy, started as tech review, but now is, doing all these deep dives into vehicle. And I think the thing that OEMs need to prioritize is understanding how their products fit inside of that equation and how to enable communities to interact with each other inside of that equation.
I definitely think that OEMs have a huge opportunity and can be part of the solution, make a lot of money on the solution. I'm not so sure about if they actually eventually will get there, because I see a lot of things that are just plain wrong. You talked about some API for GM. Most of the OEMs have done pretty much the same thing. They built their own cloud solutions where they have some APIs where you can access those clouds. Maybe they have some APIs you can use to access their vehicles. So there's a developer portal for Volvo cars and one for GM. And frankly, nobody cares, if I'm going to be really blunt. There's very few services in the world. If you're the parking company, you will not go to GM's developer portal and say, let's build a parking app, and then let's build one for Volvo, and then let's build one for Renault, and one for BMW. It doesn't scale. Even if you look at like Apple CarPlay, which you started off mentioning, Apple CarPlay or Android Auto projected, how many, on a global scale, how many companies actually want to build apps for Apple CarPlay? It's like 40, 50, something like that. That's been around for 10 years. Nobody actually wants to build car-specific services for the automotive industry in that way. So if we're going to get the services, we need to figure out a way where the threshold of engagement for the parking company, for the charging company, for the city of Detroit, for whoever, is low. So I think we need to adapt, and I think what I mean when I say that I think the OEMs are focusing on the wrong things, like building cloud solutions might be good for their own reasons, but it's never going to be something that really helps everyone else. In the same way that OEMs are not building all the roads or all the base stations for communication, there's no reason they should be the ones building all the cloud solutions either, or at least they shouldn't limit themselves to that. They need to be open to driving on other people's roads or other people's base stations.
Well, that brings up an interesting, to just try and synthesize for those that maybe didn't hear some of the other panels yesterday. And one of the panels, one of the colleagues in the back row actually pointed out that the OEMs really are going to struggle because today they still think they have to figure out who owns the customer. Yeah. And in fact, I think the specific quote was, OEMs have the worst of it. They think it's owning the customer more so than delivering the value. And so the real question is, this is a value conversation. Because unfortunately, as much as the GM folks would like to know, or the Ford, there aren't necessarily one-car families, or one vehicle families, or one brand family. And so if we're gonna be allowing people to take my wife's Honda, or my Toyota, or my kid's Mazda, or my neighbor's Ford, how does that work? And this is not a standards conversation. There's no Covessa work group that's going to settle this. The SAE's not going to settle it. It literally will be settled by the market forces. So how are the OEMs going to do this when historically they can only seem to work together in a standard technical way? How are we really going to solve this problem? Because this isn't a technical problem. It really is a business model, social, and collaboration problem. We use the word collaboration quite readily, but what's really going to happen?
My first boss told me, sorry, John.
No, go.
My first boss told me that standards are great in automotive. That's why everybody wants their own. And frankly, I think sometimes we in the automotive industry are successful in bringing standards to life. But the other thing that sometimes actually happened, to a large extent, what happened in phone industry was simply that someone started doing something and it worked, and then it gained traction. It's going to be more difficult in auto because automotive is much more fragmented than phone industry ever was. We had a vivid discussion at lunch about that. But I think that some auto manufacturers will start providing solutions where they actually can get services at scale, and that will all, and then others will follow. I don't necessarily think that it will be through apps always. Apps are great for phones, but I think we need something else for some of the use cases in cars. But someone will start and others will follow, and some will be very slow to follow, and they will fall behind.
I'm going to pivot here on that topic, though. But we talked about this earlier, and another almost elephant that we've been talking about, or steamroller that might be coming. Should I bring it up? Is the designs we're seeing from Chinese OEMs, right? I think we've all seen them, right? I did not go to the Shanghai Auto Show this year, but I had colleagues that went. They were showing me photos. I had meetings with them talking about what was going on. The second they showed me some of these cockpits, 0G passenger chairs, right? I don't think anyone's done that here, right? Designs, form factors of where they're using interior lighting now instead of just like, oh, instead of the dash in that section, we just put light here with the Class A shiny surface, right? They've taken the point where that detail of they're saying we have these new, ways of making a more unique or differentiated experience in the vehicle. Whereas I look at a lot of cockpits when I went to, Detroit Auto Show, and I was going, from the few OEMs that were there, and you guys all know who were there, but I went to each one, and there was I had a really difficult time in being like, well, if I'm a new person getting into this car, why is this unique, or what does it look different than someone else? I mean, we talked about it too, the volume knob, right? I think volume knobs either are getting smaller or I'm getting bigger, right? And I hope they never go away. I hope they never go away. And I know some OEMs did do that, and I think we were involved in one where it didn't work out so well. But, things like that of where when I get into a car, what is my experience here? Right? What is different? What is unique about it? And we're seeing with the Chinese OEMs, they're doing things where we see concepts. There's concepts I saw at Auto Show over the years. We've all seen them. Oh my gosh, that's a great concept. You guys should do that cockpit. It's doable. It is doable. It's not like the concepts are saying they can't do them. Yes, they can do them. There's very smart people that can build those cockpits. Well, there's Chinese OEMs that are saying, getting it from production, from concept to production, 18 months we're hearing, right? And so I think that's one big thing, industry, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, but I'm seeing more differentiation with Chinese OEMs. They have a lot of competition there, but there's just stuff I think with our traditional Western OEMs that they're just not grasping onto for some reason. They just continue with the same sort of refreshed design, and nothing's like wow anymore, to me at least, right?
I like what BYD is doing.
Yes, BYD stuff's very cool. Yep.
9-minute warning. We're going to open the floor in 9 minutes. 9 minutes.
One thought I would just like to add very quickly to both of your comments is loyalty at its core, right? And what that actually looks like in the future is something that manufacturers are going to have to lean into, right? Mm-hmm. So we recognize there's going to be variance among experience, except for the things that are standardized, right? Okay, so that's fair. How do you provide, what is it, you really have to discover what is it about your product that is connecting with people and amplify that and connect that to the community at large. And I think that those ways of enablement are what is going to drive loyalty in the future. And then I think about it a step further. It's like, okay, that's all great in the actual in-vehicle experience. But the other thing to layer on is the way that people discover, purchase, own, and share is also going to be transformative as well. So that experience, when you're jumping, to your point, John, from brand to brand to brand, vehicle to vehicle, inside of a family, what are the things that you can do that are going to be continuous through that? And then how do you enable that continuity for a single user in any kind of experience? And I think that that's where you're going to see manufacturers, the manufacturers who are going to get it right, they're going to be leaning into the experience side of things much more heavily.
So more on the loyalty side, like you were saying. Yeah. And the difficulty we talked about too is what they're going to have is the Tesla fanboys, the Apple fanboys. Look at that. Like regardless of what they put out, they could put out a phone that did nothing, but it's the next phone, and then like someone's going to line up and buy it. Like it doesn't matter. Right. Exactly.
I actually think the point you made with the Chinese manufacturers is a great point, because they're breaking down traditional, what we thought was like rules of what was possible. When I was at Volvo Cars, which of course is owned by a Chinese company, Geely, some of my colleagues actually moved over to China and started working for Geely. And within Volvo, typically if you wanted to exchange the display to a new display, larger screen resolution or something, that was typically a 3-year project. In Geely, they said, no, let's do it in 9 months. No, you can't do it in 9 months. No, and they actually failed, but ended up doing it, I think, in like 13 or 14 months. Because when you say this is going to take 3 years, the only thing you can be sure of, it's definitely not going to be faster. If you at least target, and that's what they are doing all the time. They're setting tough targets, and most of the time they fail, but they do it way, way, way faster than we do in Europe and in the US. So I actually think they might be the ones that, instead of us actually deciding what the future should be, we are following them. I'm not sure. Even when it comes to services, and I'm focused on that. I mean, they've got completely other ecosystems that we don't even know about here, like WeChat, which actually grew. That's a good example of something not being apps. So
Right.
they've got WeChat, which started off with just a chat application, but then there was a very simple way for companies basically to build web applications. So it's just web pages that they can push through WeChat. And suddenly you can get all these personalized, like your local grocery store. They don't have the ability to build apps, but they have a web page.
Right.
Awesome.
Yes, and then they added payments.
Yeah,
Right.
and they've got payments.
So that does raise a super interesting proposition, and which is if your statement's right that China potentially takes the lead, let's just say in China, with full ecosystem integration. We all know from IAA that China is coming into Europe and coming in hard. We also know the geopolitical nature that is currently facing us. So what happens when, with Europe in the center, East meets West, and what happens to the ecosystem concepts at a macro level where if we're building on or leaning into loyalty, we're going to lean into Apple, we're going to lean into Google, but we're going to lean into them our way, the GM way, the Ford way, and then we crunch right up against everyone else leaning into Alibaba, WeChat, others, brought to you by BYD. What actually happens, and where do we stand in terms of finally arriving eventually? But are we too late? And like truly looking back where it's going, oh crap.
We're definitely not too late. Definitely not too late. We can totally. There's so many things we can do so easily already now, and I've been in automotive now for 20 years, and it's been 20 years of frustration, so I realize I'm probably a bit of a masochist or something, because I actually enjoy it. There's so many things we can do so easily still, and I don't want to turn this into a pitch, but like that's one of the things we're trying to solve with AIDEN, but there are other solutions where there's low-hanging fruits where you can actually get services at scale easily to your car, if you at least decide that you're not going to try and do it all by yourself. Roger Lang taught earlier today, he said, what are the 3 main pain points people want to get serviced or help with when they're driving? It's traffic, it's weather, and it's parking. None of those. I cannot imagine that GM or Ford or Volvo ever would want to be, we're going to be the global weather service or parking service. By definition, it's something which is based, and it's typically highly localized as well. The best parking service in Detroit is probably different to the best one in San Francisco, right? So it's all about getting those micro services. You talk about micro experience and macro experience. To me, actually, the micro experience is what turns a smartphone into a smartphone, and what could turn a feature car into a smart car. I get my microservices, you get yours. And we talked about the generation gap. Actually, I mean, my kids actually are starting to get interested in cars because they're interested in going to places. My son will go to different skate parks and so on. He doesn't care very much about what kind of car it is. He might have an opinion about what it looks like, but connectivity in the car, that matters a lot. Actually, I mean, if he has to figure out by himself where to charge the vehicle or find gas or park it, that's terrible. That's not what he wants to do. He just want to get to wherever he's going and have that dealt with. And I think that's an area where you can compete, do that well, and actually be part of the ecosystem so that you actually can get paid for it. Because that's the thing. On average, I think people are sitting in their cars like an hour and a half every day in front of a large screen. I mean, just think about it in terms of like marketing value. People are not looking at their phones all the time when they're not using it, but here you're out driving. It's a great surface for targeted, contextual ads. I would like to get ads for where I can stop and eat when I'm out driving. I mean, now instead I have to pick up my phone and search for it, right?
Okay.
So there's a huge potential for OEMs that they can tap into. Sorry.
No. It's a great lead-in because we are at the 10-minute mark. So I had promised you all we would open the floor. But let me be clear. If you don't raise your hand, you can see that this team has no problem continuing to talk amongst ourselves. But if you do raise your hand, we'll call on you. Gentlemen, right there, yes. Yes, with the glasses.
So, thank you. It's been a great discussion so far. You bring up a lot of great topics. I get to ask a million questions, but being in the technical to business has
Yes.
been, and you would all agree, how do we convince the OEMs that taking 2 years to decide to make a system that was obsolete 5 years ago and then take 4 years to develop it, how can we persuade them that that's no longer workable? Because it wasn't workable about 10 years ago, but it's definitely not workable today.
All right, well, hold on. We're asking for opinions. So what business model and delaying an OEM? Let's get some. Keep going, and we'll get opportunity to sort of reflect everyone. Next up.
Haven't we already set a standard with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto? It's been 5-6 years now. It's a standard in almost every vehicle. How do we fight that?
Okay.
It's the standard.
All right.
It's a feature, it's integrated.
Yep.
It's a standard.
Okay. So ecosystem integration into vehicles is a second comment. Is there another comment here? Then we're going to start opening up people to kind of opine back. Any?
I already forgot the first
Oh.
one.
All right. Yeah. All right. So and I think did you have one, Kyle? Because you were having. I thought you had your hand up when I was calling it out. But if you don't, then don't.
So I guess my question is, so we've acknowledged there's a problem, right? So is the problem with the foundation of legacy OEMs, is the problem with the personality of OEMs not being willing to fail fast? Or is there a technical integration issue that's preventing us from excelling?
All right. So we have technical integration, ecosystems to the car, which we seem to have as a default, but maybe they're not. And then business model. I think all three of those can actually be rolled up into business model and recognition and acknowledgement. So I'll close the floor for a second. You guys can start waxing poetically, and then depending on where we are, I'll reopen the floor. We have 9 minutes left, gentlemen. Go on. Open.
I'll try to cover it quick, and then maybe we'll just go down the
You don't
line.
get the whole 9 minutes.
I don't
Sorry,
get the
man.
whole
No,
9
you don't get
minutes.
the whole
What,
9 minutes.
8.5?
No.
So I guess my advice from seeing from a tier one perspective and then talking with OEM colleagues in and outside the business is there's a lot of times where I see there's people, it seems like, inside the OEMs that get this. They understand it, right? And I've been involved in projects, right? But I've been involved in projects where you sort of build that confidence because everyone sees that, but then you kind of take them to the side after they say, yeah, we really want this. Well, what's the problem? Well, someone in management's scared. They're fearful of doing this now, right? And so if that's the advice I give to the OEMs is if you're going to continue to run on fear and worried that something is going to fail, and I understand there are business implications of that, then how are we going to advance if we're always scared to advance, if we're always fear that it's going to fail? Henry Ford designed his company on failure. All the great inventors, everyone invented on failure. So yes, you might fail. The things that are happening now, though, as we've talked about earlier, is hardware, as you said, is starting getting to a point where maybe it's hardware, right? And then the things around it, the services and things that are there. I'm even seeing sometimes now fear of software, right? Fear of implementing software. And it's like, well, if it doesn't work, it's not like you need to recall all the vehicles to replace the boxes. Like, you can change the software, right? So that's where I see a lot of fear of, is this going to work, and we don't know. Meanwhile, we go back to China, they're just doing it. They're just going and making it work. To your question about Apple, and it's something that I was going to bring up here, was when Apple, was it last year, they showed CarPlay 2 or whatever, where it takes over the whole screen. My first question on that is, if any OEM does do that, and if anyone in here is considering doing that, that's fine. My question to you is why are you going to spend any money on your own infotainment then? Why not just have a blank screen and you plug in your car and it just says welcome, and then plug in your phone, please? So then why do we need to put in the giant Qualcomm or NVIDIA boxes, unless it's for ADAS, right? Why do we even need to worry about it? So if OEs truly are going to hand over to CarPlay, that's fine. To me, that seems like it's throwing in the towel and saying we're not going to do it. But then on the flip side, what are you going to do with all your infotainment engineers? What are you going to do with all your infotainment stuff? You're going to put all that money into it, where most of the time, as people are either going to plug in their phone, if we continue to support it across the board, then you lose. You've given up. And if that's it, then that's it, and that's where we're going. But that's what I just don't understand.
William.
Yeah, so the CarPlay thing, that's interesting. We know there's been press releases where, since CarPlay, 2 or 3, whatever it is, that came out that does pillar to pillar, they're saying we're not adopting that. We're not adopting that for our fleet. We're not adopting that for our EVs. We're going to leave that to the ICE vehicles, and they're only going to get it in the center stack, for example. So there is still some mitigation of risk and I would say opportunity for the OEMs to own more of that in-vehicle experience when those customers aren't opting into that. So what that transitions back into is the business case. So I think what you're seeing now is the next generation of automotive thinking that is starting to emerge in the industry is somewhat technically savvy and somewhat business savvy and somewhat design savvy. There's a design thinking mentality that business teams are starting to adopt. And what that is in its infancy starting to is break down those barriers where it's not like you need to give me your entire return on investment model up front. We're going to take a look at this experience that you're building. We're going to take a look at your quantifiable customer data from some of your research that's going on in market to ensure that our trajectory is on the right path. And we're going to validate that every step of the way. And then the trick is you don't let that data die. That goes on and builds and builds and builds your future to where 10 years ago, we needed a CarPlay and we needed an Android Auto and we couldn't build great navigation experiences, whereas you're seeing now a community that has sort of adopted the best of the best and sort of let the rest fade into the background. So that's my theory on how, or my philosophy on how technology and business enablement kind of play hand in hand.
But I'm going to push you, specifically, Bill, given the extensive period of time and the fact that you weren't able to join us for the lunch. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, but it's a safe spot. It's a safe spot. The question that came up was business models. And I am often found, as people have heard me say before, the OEMs, the traditional OEMs, do not have a car problem. They do have a business model problem. So when asked who's going to win, say the first OEM that terminates the CEO that they currently have as position and hires a non-car person. Who is that going to be? Because quite frankly and honestly, Tesla doesn't have a car person in charge. Lucid does, but again, we could argue how, but the Rivian doesn't. Zook didn't. The ones that we're afraid of don't. So when will that happen? Because that might solve the business model, which might solve the other problem, which might solve the fear problem, which might actually solve all these other problems. Go.
Which would be fantastic, but we don't see that happening at the CEO level. We see that happening one layer underneath where we're bringing
Apple,
in people
Intel,
from tech
all
and
those
AIDEN
guys,
to
yep.
come and do
No,
that.
it
So
actually
there's still a
protective
protective layer.
It actually does happen at the CEO level, but that's not actually I think it's a great idea to bring people with more software skills into car companies because that's more of a problem than there's thousands of great engineers that can solve all the traditional automotive problems. You need CEOs that understand software and services. And for example, Volvo Cars, my old company, they now have Jim Rowan as the new CEO, and he used to work for BlackBerry and some vacuum company. And I actually don't think that is the problem necessarily that they need to solve. It's great with new, fresh air, really. But going back to CarPlay and Android Auto, to me, actually, I think that's not even the problem or even interesting. It's just like you said, it was something that we brought because there was no other way to run Google Maps or Spotify in the car. Now all the car companies have actually switched basically to Android Automotive, which means you can get Google Maps and Spotify in the car. You no longer need the phone, so it's actually redundant. And CarPlay 2.0 is just stupid. I don't understand why any car manufacturer would implement it. It's bad because it's only good for Apple. It's bad for the user, and it's bad for the car company. And even if you implement it, you still need to build your own version so that you have something that works in case your customer doesn't have an iPhone.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So we are at time. One of the promises I've always got is
fast.
get you out. So yes, it was pretty fast. On behalf of the panel, I want to thank you all for being an engaging audience. Thank you so very much. But if you would join me in giving these three a warm welcome and a warm applause. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Andrew Lakin,
Thank you.
Niclas Energy, and Bill Thompson. They're going to be available. You are breaking to a break. Is that great? Yep, you're breaking to a break. These guys will be around to talk to you, and they'll be around here for the rest of the afternoon. So again, on behalf, thank you so very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.